Good morning, afternoon, or evening. My name is Haley Shaner, and I will be presenting the First World War, the Imperial War Museum, and how both have had a profound impact on future generations and their education on the topic for our study abroad trip to both London and France. The Great War, or World War I, showed a turn in the century unlike anything ever seen before. The beginning of the 20th century had a great emphasis on the rise of new ideologies that challenged the old, the increased popularity in new upcoming leaders, as well as a decrease in popularity of old leaders, international relations being challenged, etc. This war either brought specific countries into economic and political prosperity or aided in the suffering of those who were affected, leading to a strew of future enemies and suffering of innocent civilians, in which another war is needed to ensure peace and stability in Europe and in the world. It is deeply important to study World War I and how it has affected other countries on both sides of the spectrum, for wars like this have an everlasting impact on a country's social, political, and economic culture. In order to know how much of an impact the Great War has had on humanity, it is imperative to look at the beginning. While the frequently cited assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, by Bosnian Serb student Gavrilo Princip is the main kickoff to the beginnings for the Great War, many historians can agree that the tensions between the world's most powerful countries, mainly between Serbia and Austria-Hungary, is what drove these regional conflicts into the world-scale war we know of today. Serbia still had resentments towards Austria-Hungary because of the two Balkan Wars that had taken place in 1912 and 1913, making the assassination of Austria-Hungary's Archduke the straw that broke the camel's back. Alliances established who was on whose side, and once war was declared between Serbia and Austria-Hungary, those who were allied with either took to their sides and prepared for war. The two main sides of this war were the Triple Entente, consisting of France, Russia, and Britain, and the Triple Alliance, which consisted of Germany, Italy, Austria-Hungary. Each side saw the other as a threat, Germany being the biggest threat to the Triple Entente due to Germany quickly becoming more and more industrialized and advanced, causing fears of a dominant German presence in Europe. Once all sides declared war, the 4-year-long tirade of warfare began on the Western and Eastern Front. World War I was a turning point for means of warfare, such as machine guns, tanks, trench warfare, flamethrowers, and biological weapons. But what made World War I stand uniquely against humanity's other wars was the trench warfare. Soldiers as young as 18 were sent to the front lines in trenches that were dug many feet below the surface, extending for 90 miles and became their own dirt cities, with signs and directions for soldiers to traverse through. Life in the trenches was anything but easy, especially in the British trenches, where they were described to be, quote, wet, cold, smelly, and thoroughly squalid, end quote. Rats and lice were a common problem in the trenches, where the damp mud and decaying corpses of men and animals were a feeding ground for such pests. One officer notes from the Ypres Salient, "We are fairly plagued with rats. They have eaten nearly everything in the mess, including the tablecloth, and the operation orders. We borrowed a large cat and shut it up at night to exterminate them, and found the place empty next morning. The rats must have eaten it up, bones, fur, and all, and dragged it to their holes." About 7,000 British men and officers were killed and wounded daily in the trenches from flying bullets from either enemy trenches and or diseases that were either caused by the rats and the lice or from the abysmal damp conditions of the trenches. How World War I finally came to a close was through the entrance of American forces to aid the Triple Entente, the dwindling conditions of Germany's society caused by the war, and allies of Germany withdrawing from their side when it was becoming obvious that the Triple Entente would turn up victorious in the war. Through those factors, Germany officially called for an armistice on November 11, 1918, at 11 a.m. A myriad of peace treaties were designed by the Triple Entente and their allies, one of those treaties being the Treaty of Versailles. These punishments weighed against Germany were tough and absolutely restrictive. The payments for reparations was the most egregious of the punishments, for Germany's own infrastructure was in ruins because of the war, and cost for aiding other countries in repair was so much that the following years brought Germany into an economic recession. World War I has had an everlasting impact on the United Kingdom as a whole. The working class and labor forces were earning more money than ever from pumping out weapons, vehicles, and artillery. Women were brought into the labor force and proved their worth by keeping the United Kingdom afloat during the war, and class distinctions were breaking down. Because of the effects made by the Great War and the sacrifices made, something had to be done in order to preserve it from the test of time. Established by Sir Alfred Maurice Mond in 1917, the Imperial War Museum aids in educating those about the United Kingdom's sacrifices during World War I, as well as preserving the collected documentation of such efforts for future generations to be taught about the war and how the United Kingdom combated such forces. Their own coat of arms for the museum says that the past may serve, meaning that the past can teach the future. The Imperial War Museum houses hundreds upon thousands of archives and documentation of the United Kingdom's sacrifices and war efforts in the First World War. The museum's extensive archives include personal and official documents, photographs, film, oral history recordings, an extensive library, a large art collection, and an extensive collection of military vehicles and aircraft, equipment, as well as other artifacts from the war. Those who were first involved with the Imperial War Museum made this educational dream into a reality. As said before, Sir Alfred Maurice Mond was the main figurehead and the first chairman for the Imperial War Museum by sending out a proposal to the War Cabinet so that a museum can be erected to document the sacrifices of the British people during this pivotal war. Baron Sir Martin Smith Conway served as the first Director General for the IWM, even traveling to France to collect artifacts and exhibits while the fighting was still going on in 1917. Agnes Ethel Conway, daughter of Sir Martin Smith Conway, also aiding in the collection of thousands of artifacts, even joining the Women's Work Subcommittee for the museum. Lieutenant Charles Fawkes actually fought in the war, and when the museum first opened to the public, he became the museum's first curator and the secretary before his retirement in 1933. The First World War is and always will be a dark spot in our history, but that doesn't mean that it can't be used to teach the future of how and why this war occurred and honor those who gave up their lives for the greater good of their country and for their people.